In 1858, a peaceful plantation portrait was taken somewhere near Natchez, Mississippi. The photograph showed a wealthy white family sitting proudly on the porch of their large plantation house. A man and woman sat in expensive chairs while their 3 children stood and sat around them, all dressed in their finest clothes. Behind the family stood 6 enslaved people. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the scene. Plantation owners often included enslaved workers in formal photographs because they wanted to display their wealth and status. But more than a century later, experts discovered that one person in the photograph had been hiding something. It was a young enslaved girl who appeared to be around 16 years old. Her face looked calm. Her posture was careful. Like everyone else, she seemed to understand that she was expected to remain completely still for the camera. But curator Dr. Jennifer Williams noticed something unusual about her hands. The girl's arms hung close to her body, but her fingers were tightly positioned around something near her waist. Jennifer enlarged the photograph. At first, the object was difficult to identify. Then she saw it. A tiny piece of folded cloth was hidden between the girl's fingers. Jennifer had examined hundreds of photographs from the period, but she had never seen anything like this. She knew that an enslaved person appearing in a formal plantation portrait was not supposed to have personal objects that might reveal private information. So why was this girl hiding a piece of cloth, and what was written on it? Jennifer contacted Dr. Marcus Chen, a specialist in advanced imaging of historical photographs. They carefully examined the daguerreotype using high-resolution equipment. The results were astonishing. As they changed the lighting and increased the contrast, faint marks began appearing on the cloth. They were not stains, they were lines. Then came small symbols. Some looked like stars, others appeared to follow rivers or roads. Marcus studied the image carefully. "This isn't random," he said. Jennifer leaned closer. "It's a map." The tiny cloth appeared to contain a hand-drawn map. Even more surprising, faint writing seemed to appear along one edge. The researchers believed one word might refer to Mississippi. Suddenly, the photograph had become much more than a family portrait. In 1858, maps showing escape routes could be extremely dangerous for enslaved people. The researchers began investigating the origin of the photograph. Family papers connected the portrait to a plantation known as Fairview, located near Natchez. The plantation belonged to Robert Thornhill, a wealthy cotton planter. Records showed that Thornhill controlled thousands of acres and enslaved a large number of people. The researchers searched plantation records for clues about the people standing in the photograph. Finding their identities was difficult because official records often reduced enslaved people to numbers, ages, genders, and physical descriptions. But then Jennifer and historian Dr. Angela Moore found a useful clue. Thornhill's plantation journals mentioned a teenage girl named Sarah. She was around 16 years old and worked inside the house as a seamstress. This was significant. A seamstress working inside a plantation house could hear private conversations, see letters, learn about visitors, and discover information about roads, patrols, and movements. Sarah may have had access to information that other enslaved people could not easily obtain. Then researchers found an entry that changed the investigation. In August 1858, only a few months after the photograph was taken, 2 enslaved people named Daniel and Ruth disappeared. Thornhill believed they had escaped. He ordered people to watch the plantation more carefully. He also suspected that someone inside the house might have helped them. A later entry mentioned unusual activity among the house servants. Another mentioned Thornhill's wife, seamstress, Sarah. He wrote that she had been seen talking to field workers even though she had been ordered not to. Then another entry mentioned that Sarah carried a small book and claimed it contained sewing patterns. Thornhill described her as clever. He ordered the overseer to watch her. A few weeks later, the journal contained an even more serious accusation. Information had been received suggesting that Sarah had helped the runaways. Thornhill planned to question her, but Sarah disappeared before he could do it. The researchers now had a possible explanation for the mysterious cloth. Sarah may have been involved in helping people escape, but they needed to know what happened to her. Angela searched records from Mississippi, Ohio, Canada, and other areas where freedom seekers were known to travel. Eventually, they found traces of a young woman named Sarah who appeared to have escaped north. One record described a young black woman who had knowledge of escape routes and had traveled through dangerous territory before reaching safety. The details matched Sarah's story. But the biggest breakthrough came when researchers located an 1866 marriage record in Natchez. It showed that a formerly enslaved woman named Sarah had married a man named Daniel. The record suggested that the couple had been separated during slavery and reunited after freedom. Could this be the same Daniel who had escaped from Fairview? The timeline seemed to fit. Daniel disappeared in 1858. Sarah disappeared later that year. The two remained separated for years. Then, after the Civil War, they reunited. The researchers followed the family line and eventually located one of Sarah's descendants, Grace Patterson. Grace had been preserving family objects for decades. When the researchers explained their investigation, Grace brought out a quilt. She said it had been made by her great-great-grandmother, Sarah. The quilt had been passed down through the women in the family for generations. When Grace unfolded it completely, Jennifer immediately noticed something strange. In one corner was an embroidered map, a map made with tiny, careful stitches. Jennifer compared it with the enhanced photograph. The roots appeared almost identical. The symbols were also remarkably similar. The researchers realized that Sarah may have recreated the secret map years after escaping. Grace then shared another family story. According to the story passed down through generations, Sarah had helped enslaved people find routes to freedom. The map was known in the family as a freedom map. It contained information about roads, rivers, crossings, and places where freedom seekers might receive help. But Sarah had apparently kept even more information. Grace showed the researchers an old notebook that looked like an ordinary sewing book. Inside were measurements, patterns, and notes about fabric. But mixed among those notes were strange phrases. Some appeared to describe distances. Others seemed to mention moon phases, crossings, and signals. The researchers believed these could have been coded instructions. Sarah may have been hiding information about escape routes inside the records of her everyday work. She could appear to be doing nothing more than sewing while secretly collecting information that could save lives. According to the family's oral history, Sarah helped multiple people escape before she was forced to flee herself. Among those people may have been Daniel and his sister Ruth. Sarah eventually made her way north and later reached Canada, where she remained until slavery ended. Daniel's story took another path. After escaping, he eventually served with the Union forces during the Civil War. When the war ended, Sarah returned to Mississippi searching for the people she had lost. She found Daniel. In 1866, they married. Together, they built a life that slavery had once tried to prevent. Sarah worked as a dressmaker. Daniel worked as a carpenter. They raised children and became part of their community. Sarah lived until 1915. She never became famous during her lifetime. She did not publish a book. She did not give speeches. She simply carried her memories and protected the evidence of what she had done. Her descendants protected those memories too. The quilt remained in the family. The map survived. The notebook survived. And eventually, the photograph survived. When researchers placed all these pieces together, the meaning of the portrait changed completely. The photograph was no longer simply an image of a wealthy plantation family surrounded by enslaved workers. It had become a record of resistance. Sarah had stood directly in front of the camera while secretly holding information that could potentially help people escape. She had to remain still for several minutes during the exposure. She could not drop the cloth. She could not look suspicious. She could not reveal what she was carrying. She simply stood there and waited. The photographer probably believed the girl was obedient. The plantation owner probably believed she was under complete control. But hidden in her hands was something they did not know about. A map that may have represented freedom. The story also showed that resistance was often more organized than historical records suggest. Enslaved people shared information. They memorized roads. They tracked patrols. They communicated through coded messages. They helped one another move through dangerous areas. They used whatever skills they had to survive and resist. Sarah's story was not simply about one person. It was about a network of people who risked punishment, separation, and death to help others reach freedom. Some of their names were never recorded. Some disappeared completely from history, but their actions mattered. The researchers also discovered stories of other people connected to Sarah. One woman named Martha may have warned Sarah that Thornhill was preparing to question her. That warning could have given Sarah enough time to escape. Martha was later punished and separated from her own children. Yet, she survived slavery and eventually reunited with her family after emancipation. Her story showed another painful truth. Freedom often came at an enormous cost. The exhibition featuring Sarah's photograph later brought her story to thousands of visitors. People stood in front of the portrait and looked carefully at the young girl's hands. Most visitors probably would have missed the detail without the modern technology. But once they knew what was there, it became impossible to see the photograph the same way. The girl's expression still looked calm. Her posture still looked obedient, But now the image carried a completely different meaning. Her hands were not empty. They were holding a secret, and that secret had survived for more than 160 years. For Sarah's descendants, the discovery was deeply emotional. Her story showed that their family history was not only about suffering, it was also about courage, intelligence, resistance, and survival. Sarah had been born into a system designed to deny her freedom and control every part of her life. Yet she found ways to gather information, protect it, and use it to help others. She survived long enough to see slavery end. She reunited with the man she loved. She raised a family. And she made sure that at least one piece of her story would survive. The map, the quilt, the notebook, and the photograph. Together, they revealed something that the original photographer could never have intended. The portrait was supposed to show power. Instead, it preserved evidence of resistance. The young girl standing quietly in the background was not simply part of someone else's story. She had a story of her own, and for more than a century it had been hiding in plain sight. In her hands, a tiny piece of cloth, a few lines, a secret map, and possibly the directions that helped people find freedom. Sometimes history does not hide in huge monuments or famous documents. Sometimes it hides inside the smallest details. A mark on an old piece of fabric, a strange note in a sewing book, a forgotten family story, or the hands of a young girl standing silently in an old photograph. Sarah's hands looked empty, but they were carrying a message, and more than 160 years later, that message was finally seen.